And welcome everyone to this Wednesday night tax day edition of the Moriah Nightly News. Everyone's least favorite day of the year, myself included. Fortunately, I filed early, so no worries on my end. But of course, if you're scrambling to get that in, we're definitely praying for you because no one likes their taxes, and that, of course, has been as old as time. But a lot to cover tonight, especially with the issues going on around the world. And do bear with me, I'm trying to upgrade this audio with a little bit of an external microphone, which is out of the picture. Hopefully that will improve the sound quality. I've been trying to pay attention to that more with the fact that we're available now on all of the podcasting platforms. So if you want to check us out there, please do that. So moving into the headlines, the war in Iran continues to remain in its tentative ceasefire. Tentative because that is what it looks like. However, there is talk across different sources. The sources we're using primarily the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, the Press Republican, all indicating the fact that there are a second rounds of talks being considered. Nothing definite for the Iran U.S. side of things. Israel and Lebanon began talking this week at the White House with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, I was going to say officiating. I don't know if that's the right term for it, mediating those conversations. Israel noted that they are seeking to uproot, and this was, I believe, from the Wall Street Journal's coverage of that, to uproot the evil of Hezbollah. So basically, they want to get rid of the problem on their border. They see this conflict as separate from the conflict with Iran, and that's causing challenges there. The president said that he would like to see a deal reached for both conflicts to come to an end sooner rather than later. So that is where that stands right now. The naval blockade is in full effect. There is nothing coming in or out without the U.S. Navy's approving it, and that is a pretty significant development to be watching to see what that will do for the oil markets. With all of the talk about the Strait of Hormuz being the critical, really it's a choke point, is what it is in economic and military terms, is an attempt to use that as a bargaining chip on the table. And there's more on that to follow here because it was just so much to cover that it just seems overwhelming here. So the strait is closed. The oil, which was going to China, by the way, much of the oil from Iran was going to China, and that has been stopped. It is not going there now. And in fact, a lot of that, at least from the reports from various outlets, seem to be indicating that it is these other nations, China included, are having to look to, at least from what we can see, the United States. That is certainly what the president has hoped, that American oil be on the table for use. There are questions, of course, as to whether in the long run the U.S. suppliers could meet those demands, and I believe a lot of that will depend on what happens here with the strait, is if the U.S. could take it or have maintained control over that area in some form or capacity, then it will shift the balance of power in that region. There are also reports that Europe is developing plans to be able to go in there after the U.S. leaves, to be able to have some type of navigation of that channel or keeping it open. It's not quite clear, of course, at this point what those plans might be in terms of more detailed military strategies, but that is being planned somewhat bitterly at the United States, I might add. They seem to be kind of grouchy towards the U.S. at the moment. And, of course, there was the question of NATO. A front page article from the Wall Street Journal noted that Europe is looking at plans to shift away from dependence on the United States for security guarantees. And Germany was, of course, holding that up in recent years. And now with their new chancellor on board with looking at other options, that will be a significant development to follow. Trump has for years said that NATO should pay more of their fair share, or that Europe should focus more on their own security. And the war in Iran has renewed that debate, and where he has not been happy or pleased with the fact that NATO countries have not come to the U.S.'s aid or allowed the United States military to use military bases and facilities across Europe. So there's a significant development there. It was also reported that the Middle Eastern nations like Saudi Arabia, along with trying to get Iran to the bargaining table, they are also looking to other nations for their arms guarantees, their military guarantees. Nations like Saudi Arabia have long bought excuse me, I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty there, and my voice is not holding up. But Saudi Arabia has been a long buyer of military goods, and nations like Saudi Arabia, Egypt was mentioned, that they are considering options elsewhere, and the big country that was mentioned was South Korea. And really, my thought on that was I didn't think that would really make much of a difference. It would still be American arms, just with basically a third party, through a third party mediator, because we have long held up South Korea as well. Now, what I believe all of this means, and again, this is my opinion, is that you have here a case of a reshaping of the global order. That regardless of what will take place here, however this pans out in whoever's favor, the global balance of power is being weighted out. Now, there was an interesting article by, if I get his name here, in this same edition. This was Greg Ip was the guy's name. It was the guy, the author of the article, who mentioned this idea of choke points. This came straight from the Wall Street Journal today, and what he is suggesting is that even with the U.S. economic power and having that economic superiority, that these nations like China and Iran hold these choke points, and it was a fair assessment, I would say, of the president's policy, both its strengths and its weaknesses. So I would recommend reading that. And my opinion, though, on some of that is that all of these issues with China, Russia, Iran, it was something that was going to have to be dealt with regardless of who the president was, regardless of who the party in office was, and there had been attempts by other administrations, including Democrats and the Obama administration, of course, with sanctions and things like that, to rein in some of these places like Russia, China, things like that. And I think it's been obvious that some of that did not work, with Iran firing off weapons that we have seen that were capable of reaching Europe, were capable of doing a ton of damage. And so that would call into question some of these other nations and what will become of that down the road, what their capabilities are. It looks like, I've said this before, that Russia has shown some vulnerabilities with Ukraine. And of course, we had reported on some of that last week, with some of that drone warfare going on there, and the ability to project warfare with Ukraine outside of its borders, which to me was unknown. So it makes me wonder how much the legacy media reports on that. Now, of course, one of the biggest critics of the president's policies in this time has been Pope Leo, the Pope. And we did a piece last week on just war theory. I read straight from the Catechism. However, some audio issues had perhaps prevented that, or prevented some of you from seeing that. And so I wanted to reiterate or summarize just briefly the main points of just war theory. Because it's been noted in the media that it's causing a rift among specifically American Catholics, as some side with the president, some side with the Pope. And I have basically said outright that the Pope has been totally off base on this and not in accordance with anything to do with church teaching. Now, of course, I'm not saying that we want to be war hawkish, that there is cause, both in the Catechism and elsewhere, that you want to advocate for peaceful solutions. But just war theory has also been a part of doctrine going all the way back to St. Augustine and the Church Fathers. And the four criteria there that specifically, if you look at number 1, that the consequences of the aggressor would be, quote, lasting, grave, and certain. And a nuclear Iran has devastating consequences for the entire international community. And that includes Rome, the Vatican, everyone, since Leo has been such an upholder of internationalism. And all the attempts must fail. Diplomacy must fail. That's the second condition. You want to make sure that the evil to be eliminated has basically outweighs the evil that will come from the conflict. And third, that there's a prospect of success. So those are the four criteria. If you want more on that, I would encourage you to take the Catechism of the Catholic Church for yourself. You can either buy a copy if you don't have one, or you can I'm pretty sure you can go online and read it anywhere for free. And those are items 2308 and 2309 specifically that reference just war theory. And that's been a doctrine since the beginning. I would say the same thing with recourse to the death penalty, that had always been the tradition of the church to leave the option on the table. But in recent years, the Pope specifically has strayed away from that. And I believe that is to the detriment of the Catholic faithful, myself included. Because I have been pretty much a Catholic for the last 20 years. The statement from Trump on that was a tweet over the weekend, aside from the blasphemous post that he put out that we did condemn. He noted some things in that I say tweet, but again, it's coming from Truth Social. pointing out the basically the outright assault on religious liberty that came about during the pandemic that the church leadership was silent on. And when I say church leadership, I'm talking more specifically about the Vatican at the time, which of course was not this pope. But so I think some valid points there. Now, this is just my opinion, but of course, with Pope Leo saying just talk it out, talk it out, talk it out, I would shudder to think of what would have happened if he had been on the chair of Peter during the 1940s with Nazi Germany in power. Because we're just going to let Hitler do whatever he wants, and we're not going to stop it, and including the killing of Jews. Which, by the way, yesterday was Holocaust Remembrance Day. There were 50 Holocaust survivors that attended an event at Auschwitz. And I highlight that in the face of growing anti-Semitism that has been on the rise since October 7th, 2023, when Israel was attacked unnecessarily and unjustly in itself. So that was Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas that were the aggressors in that case when there was no reason for it or no underlying motive except that they don't accept hatred for the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. And I will stand on that, especially in the face of critics like the anti-Semitic Tucker Carlson, who continues spewing this useless, nonsensical, ahistorical rhetoric that has no grounding in reality or fact at all. Now, hopefully, as we go along, this broadcast will continue to improve its editorial or journalistic integrity, especially with being a one-man operation when it's a little difficult, but we do the best we can. On the state level, the New York budget is up for grabs, or being debated rather, in the legislature down in Albany. A $270 billion budget up on the docket. And a lot of the debate or sparring in the legislature is not over the financial concerns, but over the things that are tacked on to it by the governor's power grab. And that was a quote from the Times-Union. That is not my own sense of it, although she is a horrible woman. The things like state insurance reform, climate laws, and the big one was, of course, an attempt to prevent or limit local and state authorities or state cooperation from cooperating with federal immigration authorities, and that will be noteworthy, of course, with Vermont having similar things going on over there in recent weeks and months as well. So, moving to the local level, there had been a lot to cover there because of some things going on around town. As many of you know, that the town of Moriah has been under a boil notice following a water break that occurred Monday night as we were doing the broadcast, and that was a state of emergency situation there. I believe Matt Brassard was the one that pulled the trigger on that, Supervisor Brassard. That was in the area of, I believe it said District 4 was the number, but that basically is the area. It was the area of town that covers the top of Broad Street, Tarbell Hill, Switchback Road, and Forge Hollow Road in that part of the community. They did get the water restored, however, due to all of that and what it might have stirred up, there's been a boil notice in effect. And so the town has worked to make sure that drinking water has been available to the public, and also for the school as well, bringing water in to those places as well. So that was the big news in the community for Moriah. Um, Elizabethtown. In Elizabethtown, there was a report that the Essex County Emergency Services were awarded the Gold Missions Lifetime Achievement Award for their record for outstanding protocol when it comes to heart attack and stroke prevention. So we want to congratulate them on that achievement. And a lot of that follows investments and improvement of services. They had put up to $1.8 million into that, and it seemed to have paid off and was a good use of money. And a bit of good news to close out tonight. We had some local athletes in the town of Moriah that were honored with the John Herbert Award. I think that's what my notes say there. I can't even read my writing on that. But you had Caitlin Larmore was for cheerleading, and Wyatt Whitman in basketball. Sorry, basketball. It is basketball. Were honored as well in the Moriah Athletics Department. There were many other athletes around the region, but none from our area specifically. Ticonderoga's logo was in the Press Republican article, but there were no athletes that we could find in that article. So if anyone has that information, then please send it to me on Facebook or by email if I got it wrong. And if, of course, as we close out, if there are any concerns, if there are any things that you feel that are noteworthy that we have been missing that should be reported on in the region, especially where I'm not able to get wind of everything that goes on around here, then do feel free to reach out by email at decalismedia@gmail.com or on Facebook, because I will always see that as well. And so I do thank you again for all of the support, all of the comments, likes, Facebook, all of that, and do continue to like, subscribe, and spread the word around town, around the area, or neighboring to the communities down in Ticonderoga, Crown Point, Elizabethtown, Westport, as much of a reach as possible for our community and our region to get this ship sailing, or this plane off the ground, whatever analogy you want to use there. So that is the Moriah Nightly News for this Wednesday evening. I hope you paid your taxes and stay well.